Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
All right, A-Pushers, welcome back. We're at another episode here. It's going to be a nice, quick one. We're going to go quickly, and we don't got a lot to cover. We're going to be talking about the presidency of Harry S. Truman after the war. This is going to include post-war prosperity or reasons why the economy was doing well in the 1950s. So we'll get right into it. We're not going to read the quote because the quote's about the Cold War, which is also happening at this time period. That's a period of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, but we're going to be focusing on the domestic issues at this time. So post-war America, World War II changed just like World War I. So there's going to be a lot of comparisons between post-World War I and post-World War II. Just like World War I had profound impacts on American culture, like the great migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North, and the changing role of women when they got the right to vote, and the jazz age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So too, post-World War II has a huge, World War II has a huge impact on American society as well. But unlike after World War I, when the United States wanted to return to normal and go back to the way it was before the war, after World War II, they do not want to go back to what it was like before World War II because, if you guys remember, students, what was happening before World War II? That's right, the Great Depression. So no one wants to go back to the Great Depression, so they're going to accept a changed role in the government. If we remember, the New Deal changed the role of government into job provider, economic regulator, and welfare provider. That was the lasting legacy of the New Deal. In foreign policy, the United States was not going to go back to isolationism either. So we're not going to return to laissez-faire or isolationism. So we changed from isolation to a military superpower and leader in world affairs. This is known as internationalism. U.S. participation and creation of the United Nations is an example of internationalism. So is the United States participation in the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and the World Bank would be also examples of, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. That would also be examples of internationalism. Post-war economic prosperity caused by increased per capita income, pent-up consumer demand for cars and houses, government road building projects, the GI Bill of Rights, and the baby boom. Achieved the highest standard of living of any society in history, and not just any history, but in all of history, according to your textbook. So there you have it. Those are the causes. Pent-up consumer demand, government road building projects, the interstate highway system, the GI Bill of Rights, which I will say is one of the most important laws ever passed in American history, and the baby boom, a rapid demographic increase of babies after World War II. The post-war period also saw the beginning of tension and conflict between the Communist Soviet Union and the Democratic USA, which became known as the Cold War. Ooh, Cold War. It's not a war. It's not cold. It's a period of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The GI Bill of Rights, it's actually called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, but everyone just calls it the GI Bill of Rights. It helped transition 15 million veterans from the military to civilian life. So there were 16 million people who fought in the army or in the military. And the biggest fear of the government as job creator was that now that all these guys were out of the army, they needed to have jobs. And so the solution was to provide a free college education. And about half of them accepted this. So that now they only had to find jobs for 6 million people. And it turned out to be not that difficult. Also, the government backed low-interest loans to buy houses, which allowed tons of people to buy houses, which means that people need to build houses. So those people that didn't go to college got construction jobs building houses or building roads. This GI Bill of Rights pushed the United States towards a post-industrial economy, which is more white-collar doctors, lawyers, and engineers, and designers, and business executives than blue-collar jobs, which are factory and farm workers. So this GI Bill of Rights, we cannot undervalue it or underestimate the impact that it had on not just the economic prosperity of the 1950s, but also just in changing us from an industrialized society to a post-industrialized society, which we are now. The baby boom and suburban growth. There was an explosion of marriages and births right after World War II. You had 16 million men returning from the war, and they decided to get married and have children almost immediately, which profoundly affected the nation's social institutions and economy as this baby boom generation, or the boomers as they call them, progressed through their ages. So in the 1950s, they're all babies. In the 1960s, they're all teenagers. In the 70s, they're in their 30s and they're starting to have kids. In the 80s, they're middle-aged in their 40s. And then now they're in their 80s, 70s, and 80s. So they're old-ish. All right, suburbs. A high demand for houses. W. Levitt built and promoted Levittown, which was mass-produced, low-priced family homes. He basically did what Henry Ford did in the 1920s with the mass-produced automobiles, but he mass-produced homes, making every one of them exactly the same, just like Henry Ford made the Model T and made every one of them exactly the same. That's what he did with homes, making it so that tons of people got homes in the suburbs. A majority of Americans lived in the suburbs by the end of the 1950s. That was the place to be. So it was moving out of the city to the suburbs, but it's still urbanization. The suburbs were cleaner, had more space, better schools than the inner cities. Road construction, especially the creation of the interstate highway system, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter with Dwight D. Eisenhower, and automobile made it easy to live in the suburbs and drive to the cities for work. It's your modern commuting. Post-war migration, Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. So we see a huge shift in where people live in the United States, a demographic shift. So after World War I, we saw the Great Migration, which was African Americans from the rural South to the urban North. And now we see the migration of the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt, the Rust Belt being the Northeast, where all the factories used to be. But as we move to a post-industrial economy, the jobs aren't in the factories anymore, right? And so then you move to the Sun Belt, which is in the South and the West. With the movement of millions of people, ultimately political power will shift from one region to another. So we're going to see presidents are going to start coming from the South and the West, where the most people are, and also political power will shift to those regions, like Texas. Post-war politics, economics, and civil rights. Truman was a moderate Democrat. In the like his predecessor, I guess he was more moderate than FDR. He boosted basic honesty, unpretentious. He famously said, "The buck stops here." He continued the New Deal traditions of his predecessor, FDR. One significant thing was the Employment Act of 1946, which created the Council of Economic Affairs, continuing in the idea that the government should be a job creator and economic regulator. The 80th Congress, Republican controlled. So the 80th Congress, the Democrats lose a majority in the Congress, which means that the lawmaking body is now Republican controlled, and you have a Democratic president. This means not a lot of things are going to get done. And then the election of 1848, which we'll talk about down at the bottom. The 80th Congress passes the 22nd Amendment in 1951, which limits the president to 2 terms. This is definitely a smack in the face to FDR, who was the only person to break the 2-term tradition. And so the Republicans made it permanent. The Taft-Hartley Act reduced the power of labor unions. So this is, again, going against the New Deal. And it's the Republican Congress limiting the power of labor unions. It's a very pro-business move. It outlawed the closed shop. It allowed right-to-work laws to be passed, which means you don't have to join a union. It outlawed secondary boycotts so that different people couldn't boycott the same thing. Or no, different unions couldn't boycott for the other one. And the president could stop a strike for 80 days if it endangered national security. All these things are limiting the power of labor unions. In the election of 1848, the Democrats are split. No one's really happy with Truman. His popularity is super low. The Progressive Party wants him to do more because he's a moderate. And the Dixiecrats are the Southern Democrats that oppose Truman's supports because Truman supported civil rights and integrated the armed forces. He was very unpopular with the Democrats of the South, who we know were super racist. So they broke away and formed a thing called the Dixiecrats, which ran a different person for president. The Republicans chose Thomas Dewey, who was the same person they chose last time, to run again as FDR. Everyone thought that Dewey was going to win. In fact, he was so confident that he didn't even barely campaign. Meanwhile, Truman went out and really hustled, gave a bunch of speech, and in a surprise upset, surprises everyone and wins the election. What do you know, Harry S. Truman? You go. He wants to have a very ambitious reform program. He calls it the Fair Deal. That echoes things like the New Deal, but it's blocked by Congress. The only thing he gets accomplished is increasing the minimum wage, which was like from 40 cents to 75 cents. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's pretty close. He supported civil rights, and his presidency was dominated by foreign policy concerns, which is going to be the Cold War, which is what we're going to be talking about next time. So students, remember, we got to the end of the first half of the notes, but remember, doing these videos is not meaning that you don't need to read the chapter. You still need to read the chapter and also process these notes, right? These are to help you understand it and to get your notes done quickly, but you still need to pay attention to them and things. So you shouldn't be watching your favorite show. Wait a minute. Mr. B History is your favorite show. So just keep watching it and like, subscribe, add comments. We're going to wrap it up. I promise to be a short episode. So there you have it. Until next time, this is Mr. B History. Later, skaters.